I was on my knees on the cold wooden floor holding my grandfather's icy hand. His eyes slowly opened, just enough for him to whisper words that changed everything. "They don't know the truth. Help me get justice." In that moment, I wasn't a military police investigator. I was simply a granddaughter looking at a man who had been left behind like he didn't matter. His breathing was weak, turning into soft white mist in the freezing air. The house felt colder than a fridge, and that note on the counter was still there, mocking me. It said, "We went on a cruise. Please take care of Grandpa." That was the moment I realized something was very wrong. That's where the real story began. Before I tell you what I discovered inside the safe, and before I explain what I did when they finally walked through the door expecting a funeral, I want to ask you something. Write in the comments. What would you do in my place? Would you report your own parents to the police? Or would you deal with it yourself? I checked Grandpa Arthur's pulse one last time. It was weak, but still there. "My name is Clara. I'm 28 years old. For the past 6 years, I've worked as a military police investigator. My job has been to track down deserters and study crime scenes people tried hard to erase. I know how to tell the difference between a simple accident and something done on purpose. When I saw the thermostat turned off during a heavy snowstorm, I immediately understood what had happened. This was not random. Most people would have called emergency services right away. Sirens would have filled the street. The house would turn into chaos. And my parents would get the perfect chance to act like shocked, grieving family members. I wasn't going to give them that chance. Instead, I wrapped Grandpa Arthur in 3 thick thermal blankets I kept in my car for work. I gave him a glucose gel pack and moved him to the warmest spot in the room. Then I got ready for their arrival. I gave them exactly what they had coming. I kept the lights off. I sat quietly in the tall leather chair in the corner of the living room, the one my father Richard always called his favorite seat. I placed my service weapon on the small table beside me, not to use it, but to make a clear statement. Next to it, I laid out the documents I had taken from the house server in the basement. Then I waited, alone, in silence, for 3 long hours. At exactly 7:15 that evening, headlights flashed across the front window. I heard car doors slam. Boots crushed the snow outside. Then I heard laughter. Loud, relaxed, and careless. "I already miss the island," my mother Brenda said as she pushed the front door open. "Why is it so cold in here? Did the old man leave a window open?" "Probably," Richard answered while pulling a heavy suitcase inside. "If he freezes the pipes again, I'm putting him in a care home tomorrow. I don't care what the will says." I let them step inside. I let them set their bags down. I even let them reach for the light switch. "Don't bother," I said. My voice was calm, but in the quiet, freezing house, it cut through the air like thunder. Brenda gasped and dropped her purse. Richard spun around, trying to see through the darkness. "Who's there?" I leaned forward just enough for the streetlight outside to reveal my face. "Hello, Dad." "Clara?" He let out a breath that sounded half relieved, half irritated. "You nearly gave us a heart attack. What are you doing sitting in the dark? Turn the heat on." "I can't," I said as I slowly stood up. "You locked the controls from your phone." "That's nonsense," Brenda snapped, pulling her coat tighter. "It must be a glitch. The system is old. We told Arthur to call a technician if—" I cut her off by tossing a stack of papers onto the coffee table. They hit the surface with a heavy sound. "That," I said, "is the activity log from the smart home system." I spoke without any warmth in my voice. "These records show the heating system was turned off manually at 4 p.m. on the day you left. It also shows that the wall thermostat tried 3 times to turn the heat back on. And every time, the system blocked it." I looked straight at Richard. "You didn't forget. You made sure the house stayed cold." The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was the silence of people who knew they were caught. "We were just trying to save electricity," Richard stuttered. His sunburned face now looked pale under the dim light. "It was an eco setting. We didn't think it would get this cold." "You knew it was below freezing outside," I replied. "You left an 82-year-old man alone in the unfinished part of the house and took away his ability to warm himself. That isn't saving energy. That's putting a life in danger." Brenda slowly stepped back toward the door. "You've lost your mind," she said. "You've been in uniform too long, Clara. You see enemies when this is just family." "I don't see enemies," I answered calmly. "I see evidence. And right now, you're standing on a restricted area. Please leave." Richard stood up straight, trying to bring back the authority he once had over me when I was young. "This is my house," he said firmly. "You don't tell me what to do here." "I do," I replied, stepping closer. "When I have proof that can send you to jail. Leave. Right now." For a moment, I thought I had won. Richard looked at the documents, then looked at me. A flash of fear crossed his face. He picked up his suitcase. Brenda was already crying, her hand shaking as she reached for the door. It looked like they were backing down. It felt like victory. But I should have known better. People like him don't give up easily. They don't run. They adjust their plan. Richard didn't argue. He didn't beg. Slowly, almost chillingly, the corners of his lips lifted. It wasn't relief. It was confidence. Like someone who knows the game isn't over yet. "You really believed we came back without a plan?" he said quietly. And before I could even react, the moment his tone changed, everything shifted. Blue and red lights suddenly filled the room, flashing through the front window and washing over the walls. Sirens didn't fade in from far away. They were already there, loud and close, right outside the house. That's when I understood. He hadn't called for help when he saw me. He had done it earlier, long before we arrived. "Police!" A strong voice called out from the porch. "Open the door. Now." "Help!" Richard shouted. His voice broke perfectly, like he was on cue. He rushed down the hallway, putting distance between us. "She has a weapon," he cried. "She's not stable. Please, she's going to hurt us." The front door didn't open gently. It was forced open. 3 officers moved in quickly, filling the hallway. Their focus locked onto me as bright lights flashed in my face. "Hands up," one of them commanded. "Let me see your hands." That's when my training took over. Not a fight response, a survival response. I knew exactly how it looked to them. Someone sitting in a dark room, a weapon on the table, 2 adults shouting in fear. If I reached for anything, it would be over. So I lifted my hands slowly, palms open. "I'm a federal agent," I said. "My ID is in my—" I didn't get to finish. Before I could react, officers moved in. I was pushed down onto the floor, face first. The impact knocked the breath out of me. My arms were pulled behind my back, and cuffs snapped into place. They were tight. Final. "Weapon secured," one officer called out, removing the gun from the table. "Get her out of here," Richard shouted, rushing forward. His voice shook perfectly. The worried parent, played to perfection. "She broke in," he said quickly. "She hasn't been herself since returning. She's unstable. She's dangerous." Then, through the dust and pressure, I forced out the words, barely able to breathe. "Check the back room," I said. "Please, check on Arthur." "She's imagining things," Richard said calmly, cutting me off. Then he reached into his jacket, not for anything threatening, but for something far more effective. He pulled out a folded document with a blue legal cover. "Officer," he said evenly, "I am Arthur's court-appointed guardian. My daughter has no legal authority here. She entered without permission and is making threats toward my responsibility." The sergeant, a broad man named Miller, took the papers. He read them under his flashlight. I watched his posture change. His shoulders eased. This was no longer a serious incident to him. It looked like a family dispute, backed by official paperwork. "Get her up," Miller said. They pulled me to my feet. I searched the room for my mother. Brenda wasn't crying anymore. She stood quietly by the fireplace, fixing her coat, smoothing out every crease. That's when it truly sank in. A cold realization, heavier than the cuffs on my wrists. She wasn't looking at me with fear. She wasn't looking at me at all. It wasn't hatred. She wasn't staring at me with anger or drama. She looked at me with irritation, like I was a problem she didn't want to deal with. That's when I understood something terrible. They didn't hate my grandfather. They didn't hate me either. To them, we were numbers on a page, costs, losses, inconveniences. They didn't turn off the heat out of cruelty. They did it because keeping an unused part of the house warm cost hundreds every month, and letting nature take its course was cheaper. That realization sent a chill through me. This wasn't rage or chaos, it was routine. In their minds, letting my grandfather die wasn't a crime, it was a financial decision. And getting me arrested wasn't betrayal, it was damage control. "Get her out of my sight," Brenda said flatly. "She's disturbing the balance." As they pushed me toward the door, I shouted to the sergeant, desperate. "You're making a mistake. Check the timestamps. Look at the heating records." He didn't even slow down. "Tell it to the judge," he said. "Soldier," Miller said, tightening his hold on my arm. As they pulled me forward, Richard stepped into my way. He leaned in close, his voice low, meant only for me. "You play small games," he whispered. "I play the system. By morning, he'll pass from natural causes, and you'll be held for threatening your family with a weapon." He smiled slightly. "We've already won." Then I was pushed outside. The cold night air hit me instantly, sharp and unforgiving. Sirens blared so loudly they swallowed my voice. The chill wasn't just the winter weather. It was the sudden shock of everything I believed breaking apart. Miller pulled me down the driveway, his grip firm and unrelenting. Lights flicked on around us. Neighbors watched quietly from behind their curtains, seeing only a troubled soldier being taken away. He pressed me against the patrol car. The cold metal met my cheek. And in that moment, one thought cut through everything else. Just 3 years earlier, I had been standing in a desert heat, drenched in sweat, layered in gear, trusting the rules, trusting the mission, trusting the system. And now, none of that mattered. My father had called me before, crying. "The boiler stopped working," he said. "Your grandpa is freezing. We don't have the money to fix it." I emptied my savings. I lived on basic rations and skipped every break so they could stay warm. "Stop resisting," Miller ordered, twisting my shoulder. "I'm not resisting," I said, my face pressed against the freezing metal. "I'm trying to tell you, you've got the wrong person." "Enough," he replied. Richard stood on the porch now, holding Brenda as she cried into his chest. He looked like the image of a deeply worried son. "Please, officer," he said gently, "just make sure she gets help. She's not herself." 2 years earlier, I had been pulling double shifts, barely sleeping, completely drained. Brenda had called me then too. "I can't handle your grandfather anymore," she whispered. "I need time away. I'm falling apart, Clara." I sent the money. I paid for the retreat. I paid so everything could stay calm. And standing there in the cold, it hit me. I had been paying for their peace all along. The truth hit me harder than the cuffs ever could. They hadn't only taken my inheritance. They hadn't only drained my grandfather's pension. They had taken advantage of me. Every dollar I sent home, every extra shift I worked, every sacrifice I made while serving, it wasn't helping the family survive. It was paying for time. I was the money that allowed them to live comfortably while they waited for Arthur to pass. They turned my guilt into income. They turned my sense of duty into a tool. I stared at the house. The smart system I paid to install. The roof I paid to repair. The heating system I paid to upgrade. The same system they used to leave the man who built that house without warmth. Miller opened the back door of the patrol car. "Watch your head," he said. I looked back one last time. Richard wasn't watching me leave. He was checking his watch. As if he already knew everything was right on schedule. He was calculating how long it would take once the house was quiet again. To them, this wasn't a tragedy. It was a calculation. And they had just decided I was a risk they could finally remove. But as Miller pushed me into the back seat, the metal barrier closing me off from everything outside, something changed. The tears stopped. The shock faded. The training came back. They thought it was over. They believed that cuffs meant the situation was finished. They forgot one simple rule. Reviews go both ways. I stopped resisting. In the back of a patrol car, struggling only makes things worse. Fighting, yelling, begging. That's what people do when they've lost control. That's what they expected. But I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't a panicked family member. I was thinking clearly. And with sudden, sharp focus, I understood the mistake I had made. I had been fighting the wrong fight. I had been trying to convince them with emotion. When the truth was, facts were the only thing that mattered. I finally understood my mistake. I had been appealing to emotion. But Sergeant Miller wasn't guided by emotion. He followed procedure. He followed the law. "Sergeant Miller," I said. I didn't raise my voice. It was calm, even. The kind of tone used in official briefings. It cut through the cold air. He stopped, one hand still on the car door. He looked down at me, clearly irritated. "Check the timestamp," I said. He frowned. "What?" "The guardianship papers," I replied, holding his gaze. "Look at the notary stamp." Richard claimed he received emergency custody yesterday because Arthur's condition was getting worse. But compare that with the smart home logs, I continued. They show Richard logging in from an overseas location at the exact same time. Miller went still. "Unless he had a notary with him on vacation," I said steadily, leaning forward as much as the cuffs allowed. "That document is fake." "And if that paperwork is forged," I added, "then he isn't a legal guardian at all." "He's not protecting anyone," I said. "He's hiding evidence." "She's lying," Richard shouted from the porch. His voice was sharp now, strained, almost desperate. "She's trained to manipulate people. Don't listen to her." Miller didn't turn toward Richard. He looked down at the documents in his hand. He switched on his flashlight and studied the stamped date carefully. Then he lifted his gaze toward the house, toward the dark, unfinished section where I had found Arthur. "Sergeant," I said quietly. I lowered my voice, forcing him to step closer to hear me. "If he's the respected head of the family," I asked, "and I'm the intruder, why was he locked away in the unused wing?" I saw it then. Doubt hit him hard. He understood standards of care. He knew what proper support looked like. And he knew what neglect looked like, too. "Why is the heat shut off in the main house?" I continued calmly. "If they just returned, why is the temperature barely above freezing?" Miller straightened slowly. Everything about his posture changed. Miller glanced at his partner, the younger officer standing near the driver's door. "Keep an eye on her," he said. "Hey!" Richard shouted as Miller turned and walked back up the driveway. "Where are you going? You need to take her in. She's dangerous." Miller didn't respond. He walked straight past Richard, ignoring the hand reaching out to stop him, and pushed the front door open. "You can't go in there," Brenda cried, gripping Richard's arm. "Arthur is resting. The stress could be too much for him." "Then I'll keep it quiet," Miller replied. And with that, he stepped inside. From the back seat, I watched through the cruiser window as Richard's expression changed. The worry disappeared. So did the sadness. What replaced it was fear. Real fear. The look of someone who suddenly realized he had left behind the one thing that could expose everything. Brenda stared at the house, biting her lip. They weren't paying attention to me anymore. They were listening. I let out a slow breath. I had bought myself time. Not a win. Just a pause. And sometimes, that's enough. Pauses are dangerous. That's when investigations fall apart. And that's when I underestimated Brenda. While Richard stood frozen, she moved. Calm, quick, focused. She slipped out through the kitchen door, not to check on Grandpa, but to clear the room. When Miller came back, his face gave nothing away. "Bring her inside," he said. That told me enough. Doubt had started to grow. I walked back through the damaged doorway, ready to show him the digital trail Richard couldn't remove. But the room wasn't the same. The table was empty. The smart home records were gone. My laptop lay broken. Paperwork ripped apart, scattered everywhere. Brenda was on her knees, crying. "She did this," she sobbed. She was talking about being watched. She destroyed everything. It was perfectly staged. Not just erased evidence, but a story built to make me look unstable. "I didn't touch it," I said calmly. "Check how it broke. It was thrown." I reminded him I'd been outside, in cuffs. Miller didn't study the wreckage. He looked at me, not with anger, but with sympathy. "We found the medication, Clara," he said quietly. He spoke while holding something up. "My grandfather's old heart medication. Expired." "It was in your jacket," he said quietly. "He's struggling to breathe." "He was stable 10 minutes ago," I replied sharply. "I gave him glucose and water." "He collapsed," Richard said, stepping forward at just the right moment, his face full of shock. "She gave him something." I held Miller's eyes. "Run a toxicology screen," I said firmly. "Now." "Medical is on the way," Miller replied. "But right now, we're dealing with you." The cuffs tightened. And just like that, the story shifted. I wasn't a witness anymore. I was a problem. They walked me toward the door as Richard leaned in close, his voice low. "He won't last long," he whispered. "You'll be locked away before this is over." I stopped walking. Then I heard something unexpected. Not a siren. Not crying. The sharp tap of a cane against hardwood. "Sergeant Thomas Miller," a strong voice called out. "Do you still stand by your oath?" Everything froze. In the hallway stood Judge Arthur Blackwood. Upright. Steady. Wearing the same quiet authority he always had. And for the first time that night, the balance shifted. Judge Arthur Blackwood stood in his judicial robes. "My son," he said calmly, "is a liar and a felon." Richard shouted about dementia. Arthur ignored him. He lifted a small remote and pressed a button. The TV flickered to life. Video and audio time-stamped. Richard forging documents. Brenda laughing. Plans to shut off the heat and let nature take its course. Silence fell, heavy and complete. "Uncuff her," Miller ordered. Arthur stepped forward. "I am pressing charges," he said. "Attempted manslaughter, fraud, forgery." Richard and Brenda were cuffed. This time, for real. "Blood is biology," Arthur said quietly but firmly. "Family is a moral contract. You broke it." They were dragged back into the same cold they had tried to weaponize. I turned up the heat. Arthur sank into his chair, exhausted, but alive. "I'm tired," he whispered, "but I'm warm." "We saved each other," I said. They thought the cold would finish him. They forgot one thing. Cold can preserve evidence, and truth always finds a way.